we'll take another presentation on aflatoxin. And to do this would be Godfrey Magoke. Godfrey is with the University of Sydney in Australia.
Good afternoon. So, my name is Godfrey from the University of Sydney. Actually, doing my PhD studies there, but to tell the truth, I'm coming from Tanzania. So today, I'm going to present on aflatoxin contamination of village grains in central Tanzania, food and agricultural practices in relation to aflatoxin risk. Food contamination with aflatoxin is a serious health threat worldwide, particularly in developing countries, including sub-Saharan Africa. This is where we find this sort of prevailing hot, humid weather, which is conducive for the proliferation of the fungi or the mold which produce these toxins. Now, I've mentioned there the two species of fungi in the Aspergillus group that are the main producers of aflatoxins when they grow on, when they infect the crops that are still on the farm, but in grains that are under improper storage conditions. So aflatoxin normally occurs in cereals and the nuts, particularly maize and groundnuts. And it happens that maize and the groundnuts are consumed almost on the daily basis, at least in large parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And these are the main grains which are most susceptible to contamination with aflatoxins. So, aflatoxin has been associated with a number of health issues, including acute toxicity. We have some documented cases in Kenya in 2004, where we had an outbreak of people consumed highly contaminated maize-based food that contaminated with significant quantities of aflatoxins. And these people suffered acute symptoms of liver damage. So at least 315 were hospitalized, and 100 and something of them, they died from that disease, acute liver failure from consuming these high levels of aflatoxin in contaminated maize. So another health issue is liver cancer. So at least 550,000 up to 600,000 new cases of liver cancer called hepatocellular carcinoma, which is the type of liver cancer which has been associated with ongoing consumption of sub-lethal aflatoxin in the staple food, especially in maize or groundnuts. So, and most of these cases of hepatocellular carcinoma, this liver cancer, are found in developing countries where we have much of the aflatoxin exposure. So studies have associated aflatoxin exposure with childhood stunting. Aflatoxin also causes immunosuppression, but reduced animal performance, particularly poultry, in terms of growth rate and body weight gain. So my study was conducted in Manyoni. This is a semi-arid district of central Tanzania, and it involved 8 villages, with the aim to explore agricultural and food practices associated with aflatoxin contamination and exposure risk, but also to determine the extent of contamination in various village grain categories consumed by chickens and the people. So we did rapid screening of the samples that were just pre-harvest samples that were grains that were harvested just immediately around the time of harvesting, 134. Then we also sampled 157 storage samples that they were stored at least for more than 6 months. So the after-check test is analogous to the strip testing that are commonly used in medical practices. I think most of us are aware of those strips which are used for urine pregnancy test, those strips. So this test can discriminate samples that are contaminated above and below a particular cutoff point. And our cutoff point was 10 microgram per kilogram. So 10 microgram per kilogram, this is the maximum level of contamination which can be tolerated in foods, and this has been set by the Tanzania regulators. So this seems a bit ambitious because most of the other countries have set 20 microgram per kilogram as the limit which can be tolerated in foods, including USA. So most of the samples are coming from maize, groundnut, and sorghum, at least 60% of them. And we know that maize, sorghum constitute most of the grains that are consumed, at least on the daily basis, in most of the sub-Saharan Africa, at least. To explore food practices and food and agricultural practices that may be associated with these aflatoxin risks. So we did some interview and observations on the practices that farmers have in area-related crop cultivation, harvest, storage, food processing, and the knowledge on aflatoxin. So we found that much of the contamination was coming from maize and the groundnut samples. And as you can see from the yellow, depicted by the maize on the yellow graph there, it seemed that much of the samples that were contaminated above the limit were coming from samples that were stored for more than 6 months, storage samples. So there is a storage effect to the aflatoxin contamination. So those graphs show the range of contamination. So you can see that aflatoxin grains, the grains were contaminated up to the range of 350 microgram per kilogram in the stored groundnuts, which are quite significant contaminations if you see that the limit which has been set is 10, so it is more than 20 times the maximum tolerable limit. So these are some of the risks which we see that are associated with aflatoxin contamination and exposure. So we have seen there is no application of fertilizer, there's inadequate rainfall, there's not much rainfall, so these crops may be stressed, then it becomes easier for the fungi to infect and produce the toxins. So we have some of these surfaces which are used to dry the grains, and this surface may be associated with some risk of aflatoxin contamination. So the storage facilities also, especially the nylon bags, which are increasingly used nowadays, these may be associated with increased contamination, especially when the grains are stored without being dried adequately. So we have insect damage, which may be also associated with increased risk, because this also is a big problem in the area that most of the grains are infested with insects. So food processing, people may do food processing, that this mostly is done manually, and around the farming time, most people have no time to do this, so they may consume just the whole grain without doing any processing like the deharing. So there was no knowledge on aflatoxin. So in conclusion, village grains for human consumption in central Tanzania may be contaminated with high concentration of aflatoxin, and this can pose significant health risks. So the existing practices also may assist the contamination and exposure. So we recommend that better extension services, the use of livestock manure, fertilizer, and the farmers being assisted with drought-tolerant seeds, as well as better drying and storage technologies to achieve optimal and safe food production. And we are planning to prepare some extension materials to enhance village farmers' knowledge. So thank you for your attention.